Welcome to the hidden corners where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind. Welcome to the Wolfman Chronicles, Book 6. This is episode 72. Unfortunately, Clay is under the weather this weekend, so I'll be doing the reading today. We are on Chapter 8. This is Werewolf Gold, and we are on Achill Island, Ireland. The coins felt heavy in Jack's hand as he slowly turned them over, inspecting the inscriptions on the 2 gold guineas. The gold gleamed brightly in the flickering light of the fireplace. The ancient symbols carved into the surface seemed to shift slightly under his gaze, as though the metal itself pulsed with energy. Jack rubbed his eyes and held them closer. "No chance there's a magnifying glass around here in one of the drawers?" he asked. "Here, use these," Miguel replied, handing him a pair of reading glasses. "I never thought I'd be needing a pair of these," he smirked as he placed the glasses on his face. Suddenly the coins came into clear focus. "This is definitely solid gold," he remarked, "and very old." Miguel nodded. "The girls thought it was a good idea to wait until you'd seen them, and then they plan on going back to the beach tomorrow and pretending they're playing in the water so as not to attract any attention." "I think that's wise," Jack replied. He sat back in the large cushioned chair in front of the fireplace. Sasha was asleep upstairs, and the rest of the family were at the guest house down the street. Miguel and Jack were sipping a glass of cognac and smoking a cigar in front of the fire. Jack was too wound up to sleep, and Miguel was good company. "There's something not right here. That whole incident this morning with Fiona's car, and now this, not to mention all the strange occurrences we've been dealing with for the past couple of weeks. It just doesn't add up. I'm convinced they're all tied together somehow." Miguel nodded. "I agree with you, Jack. I can't put my finger on it, at least not yet, but I think there's something we're missing. We're trying to put together this puzzle, and not all the pieces are here. Let's go over the events of this morning again. There's got to be something we're missing." "Besides Fiona?" Jack frowned. "Well, like I said earlier, I spent the morning up at Malachi's, and then I was driving back here when I saw that car parked on the side of the road, engine running and headlights on. It was foggy through that section of road that runs along the cliffs, and I had just rounded a bend, so I didn't see that car until I was almost right on top of it." "And you didn't see any other cars?" Miguel asked. No other cars, but Fiona's phone was still displaying the message she was writing, so she couldn't have been gone long or the screen would have gone blank. The only thing that makes any sense is that someone grabbed her." Miguel nodded. "There could have been another vehicle that you didn't see. Maybe someone was trying to force her over, and rather than driving off the cliff, she stopped the car right there, on the edge. The person in the other car could have grabbed her and turned around just before you came around the bend." "Yes, that's true," Jack agreed. "It is possible that I didn't see another car that had already fled the scene in the other direction, since it was foggy." "You don't think she would have jumped, though, not with the message she left on the phone, right?" Miguel asked. Jack nodded his head. "I stayed until the police guard got there, and then I drove up to Malachi's and let him know what was happening. By the time we got back to Fiona's car, the Irish Coast Guard was already there and checking the rocks below. Unless she disappeared in the surf, she's not down there." What does Malachi think happened to her? Miguel asked. He's convinced someone took her. Fiona is actually Malachi's sister-in-law. She was married to his brother, Finn O'Shea. Seems he had a falling out with some of the locals here and was basically run out of town. He had a bad accident and drove off a cliff. Now Malachi thinks someone is trying to do the same thing to Fiona. What, run her out of town or kill her? Miguel asked. Jack shook his head. Who knows? Maybe both. Miguel was pacing back and forth in front of the fire. He stopped and looked at Jack. When are you going to talk with Father O'Malley? Jack set his glass of cognac down and put another log on the fire. We're supposed to meet in the morning. Why? I want to come with you. It's just a hunch, but I think Father O'Malley might not be the man you think he is, Miguel replied. Well, you're right about that. He's actually a wolf, according to Malachi, Jack responded. I know, but there's something else. Like I said, it's just a hunch. I can't quite put my finger on it yet, but I'd be careful trusting him too much, Jack. Out of all the people you've mentioned, he's the one that just doesn't fit. Jack laughed. Doesn't fit? What about the devil figure at the cemetery, or the screaming banshee that appeared in the kid's window, or the girl with the wild red hair that just randomly appeared at our door and warned us that our lives were in danger, or the mysterious man in the long black cloak? Oh, and not to mention the severed goat's head on our doorstep. Miguel, nothing has made any sense, not since we arrived in Ireland. Miguel chuckled. I know. But listen, Jack, all those things you just mentioned, they're all the stuff of myth and legend. Ireland's full of stories like that. He stopped pacing, his gaze locked with Jack's. The flicker of firelight cast sharp shadows across his face, and for a moment it made Miguel look dark and sinister himself. But Father O'Malley, there's something about him, something hidden. Jack leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He's a priest, with wolf blood running through his veins. Seems like he belongs in this circus just as much as the rest of all these characters. Miguel started pacing again, stopping to gaze out the window at the dark night. I'm not saying he's your enemy, Jack, but he's hiding something big, and whatever it is, it could be the key to everything that's happened on this island. I feel like it's right under our noses, but we're just not seeing it. Jack looked at Miguel for a long moment. So what do you suggest? Confront him? Demand answers? Miguel shrugged. No, not yet. We need to gather more information. We need to know what we're dealing with here. Just be careful how much you tell him. The devil you don't know might be sitting closer than you think. Jack stood and put his hand on Miguel's shoulder. I take your warning seriously, Miguel. I've never known you to be wrong on a hunch. Miguel nodded. Thanks, Jack. And one more thing. Don't show him the gold. Jack took the 2 gold coins out of his pocket and handed them to Miguel. You have my word. They held each other's eyes for a moment before Jack turned and headed upstairs to bed. Miguel sat in front of the fire, staring at the flames. What is really going on here? He asked himself. What is it that's lingering just on the periphery of my vision? He thought of the Mavka back home in Alaska and realized he actually missed her. He wondered if she missed him as well. As he stared into the flames, he could almost see her face, and as his eyes slowly closed, he thought he heard her call to him. The morning was bustling with activity between the 2 houses. The twins ran down the stairs, anxious to go back to the beach and play in the sand. After breakfast, Kat declared, "and only if you eat all your eggs." The walk to the guest house was brisk, the air damp and cold, but once they were inside, the smells from the kitchen and the fire in the fireplace wrapped around them like a warm embrace. The guest house was alive with chatter and the clinking of dishes as Juanita set the table. Grizzly sat near the fire, poking at the logs with a metal poker. As the twins ran up to him, he made a face and growled. The kids squealed with laughter and ran off to the kitchen to see what Rosa was making for them. Juanita poured coffee in everyone's mugs, and Rosa brought out steaming platters of scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and fluffy pancakes drizzled with honey. The rich aroma of freshly baked cinnamon rolls wafted from the oven, the result of several hours of hard work from the previous afternoon. "What are the little pirates going to do today?" Julian asked as he ruffled the kids' hair and took a seat at the table next to them. "We're heading back to the beach after breakfast," Kat said, pouring syrup for the twins. "They're determined to build the biggest sandcastle Achill Island has ever seen." "And we're hunting for treasure," they both exclaimed in unison. Sasha looked up from her mug of coffee, her brow furrowed. "How about you, Jack? What's the plan for the day?" "Miguel and I are going over to talk with Father O'Malley." He looked over at Julian and Usko. "How about you two?" "We're going up to the cemetery and the ruins at the deserted village and take a look around. This is the first clear day we've had, and I want to get a feel for the place in the daylight," said Julian. "Anyone else want to come with us?" The constant damp weather had made Grizzly's bad leg flare up, and he said he was content sitting in front of the fire. Carl agreed to go, however, so while the women were gathering towels and toys for the kids to play with at the beach, the men grabbed their coats and boots and prepared for the walk up the mountain. Father O'Malley was waiting for Jack in the alcove. It was a small structure, built with hand-chiseled rocks and covered with moss that glistened faintly in the morning light. The alcove felt ancient, older than the church, and built around the same time as the deserted village itself. The air inside was heavy with the scent of earth and salt, combined with sweet incense and candles. Jack and Miguel approached quietly, their boots crunching on the moist gravel path. O'Malley stood with his back to them, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the gray sky blended seamlessly with the restless ocean. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back, and the tension in his shoulders was unmistakable. "Father," Jack called out softly, stepping into the alcove. O'Malley jumped, his face lined with concern. "Sorry, you startled me. I guess I was deep in thought. Thank you for coming. Who's your friend?" Jack introduced Miguel to Father O'Malley, and the two shook hands. Miguel noticed that the good father seemed terribly agitated and wondered if it was because Jack had brought him along, unannounced and uninvited. Jack leaned against the rough stone wall, folding his arms. "Miguel is here to help us plan our move. I talked with Malachi yesterday. He's ready to forget the past if you are." Father O'Malley sighed and continued to gaze out towards the sea. "Excuse me for saying so," Jack said softly, "but you seem terribly disturbed. Did something happen since we last spoke?" Father O'Malley did not turn to face Jack, but continued to stare ahead. In a quiet voice, he said, "I heard about Fiona. How is Malachi taking it?" "Well, he's worried, of course, but he doesn't think she jumped. He's convinced someone took her," Jack replied. The father turned sharply, a look of fear in his eyes, though he was trying hard to hide it. In a calm voice, he said, Malachi's right. She was taken. Do you know where she is, or who took her? Father O'Malley hesitated, his gaze returning to the horizon as if seeking an answer in the vastness of the sea. His hands, clasped tightly behind his back, trembled. He drew in a slow, measured breath. I don't know exactly where she is, he admitted, his voice carrying the weight of both sorrow and urgency. But I have a strong suspicion about who took her and why. Jack straightened, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Go on. O'Malley turned fully now, his face pale and etched with worry. He paused. There's a figure from the old legends, one rarely spoken of even here, a guardian of sorts, or a captor, depending on the version of the tale. Some say it protects the island, others that it punishes those who disturb its resting place. Jack's eyes narrowed. And you're telling me that this guardian has Fiona? O'Malley nodded. It's been called many things, but the one name that remains constant is the Watcher. The stories say it appears when the balance of the island is threatened, taking a soul as payment for transgressions. Malachi's recent actions, digging too deeply into the past, stirring old conflicts, it might have drawn its attention. Jack stared at O'Malley, assessing his words. Well, if this Watcher has her, how do we get her back? The priest's expression darkened. That's the part that worries me the most, Jack. No one has ever returned from the Watcher's grasp, not without consequences. Jack's jaw tightened. O'Malley held his gaze, the hint of fear in his eyes now mingled with the flicker of something else. Something Jack couldn't put his finger on. So what do we do now? Asked Jack, trying hard to read what lay behind the father's expression. We pray that no one else is taken, O'Malley whispered, taking a deep breath and glancing once more towards the sea. While his back was turned, Miguel took the opportunity to scan the alcove and the surrounding bushes. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He tried to focus on the sensation, hoping to narrow in where it was coming from. And then he saw it, tucked discreetly among the rock walls, a small camera lens pointing straight at them. He glanced down quickly, not wanting to let whoever was watching know that he'd spotted it. He glanced again at the father's hands, clasped behind his back, and noticed they were no longer shaking. Father, Miguel asked, glancing around the surroundings as if he was greatly intrigued by the beauty, would you mind showing me around the grounds and the church? It's quite beautiful and, well, I grew up in the Catholic Church. I'd like to pay my respects. Certainly, Father O'Malley replied, leading them down the path towards the church and the rectory. He gave Miguel a tour of the small church, and while Miguel took it all in with awe and reverence, he noted several more cameras hidden in discreet places. The tour ended in the rectory, where O'Malley offered them both a cup of tea and took a seat beside the grand fireplace. The full moon is tomorrow night, Jack commented. We don't have much time to put this all together. Malachi and his group of friends will meet us tomorrow at nightfall. My family members are up at the graveyard today, getting the lay of the land and a feel for where we can be hidden. What are your plans, Father, for getting your group up the hill without being seen? Father O'Malley glanced up, and Miguel caught him looking toward one of the cameras tucked into the bookcase. I believe that somewhere around midnight we'll see a procession moving up the mountain toward the graveyard. You and Malachi and whoever you're bringing with you need to be hiding behind the big rock outcropping next to the graveyard. You'll be well hidden back there. Myself and the parishioners that are joining me will come up the trail just shortly after midnight. Whoever is summoning this devil will be surprised that we are holding a candlelight vigil and will possibly try to run or hide. That's where you come in. You've got to capture the men who are doing the summoning. Then we'll arrive and everyone will be exposed. We will pray and seal the portal to the other world. Jack listened to the father's plan and thought to himself, that's it? Are your prayers going to be strong enough to seal the portal of an evil entity? It's no wonder Malachi chooses to use his own methods. That's it then, Jack replied. The father stood and took the cups from Jack and Miguel. That's the plan, and until then I have a lot of work to do, so please excuse me. Jack and Miguel both rose and shook the father's hand. They were escorted out of the office, and the father shut the door behind them. As they walked down the path towards the street, Jack remarked, "Well, that was strange. I guess I was expecting more of a concrete plan." Miguel didn't say anything until they were well down the block from the church grounds. He looked around to make sure no one was listening. "He was lying, Jack, about everything." Jack stopped and looked at Miguel. "You're sure? What tipped you off?" "Well, while the two of you were talking and his back was turned, I found several cameras pointing at us. Same thing in the church and the rectory." "Well, that's nothing unusual," Jack commented. "Well, there's more," Miguel replied. "He was very nervous when we first walked up and refused to look our direction. And then he concocted that crazy story about the Watcher, and suddenly he seemed to relax. His hands quit shaking, and his eyes quit darting around. I got the distinct feeling that he was quite proud of himself for coming up with that explanation on the fly. Now, Jack, you know I might be wrong, but I'd bet you $1,000,000 that this father is not who you think he is." Jack nodded his head. "Okay, so what do we do?" Miguel paced back and forth, his brow furrowed with frustration. "I say we head up that mountain just as planned, only we don't hide behind the rock outcropping where he told us to hide. I'm sure there's someplace else we can find where we won't be seen. We will watch what happens at midnight, and we'll watch for the father to arrive. If he's up to something, we'll catch him in the act. And if he's telling the truth, well, we'll deal with whatever we find." Jack started walking toward the house again. "You think he's lying about all of it? The Watcher, the devil, the entity buried under Sleevemore?" Miguel stopped walking and turned to face Jack, his expression grim. "I just have a feeling about this, Jack. I think either the father is setting us up in a trap, or this is about something else entirely. I'm not buying his story about the Watcher, the devil, or anything else supernatural. It's too convenient, too dramatic." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But what would his angle be, Miguel? Why would he want to manipulate us like this?" Miguel's lips pressed into a thin line. "Think about it, Jack. He's the one who's been feeding us all this information about Sleevemore, about the legends, about this so-called ritual. What if he's trying to scare everyone off the mountain for his own reasons?" Jack's eyes narrowed. "But it hasn't just been O'Malley. The whole town's been suspicious of us since we arrived here." Miguel hesitated, then added, Maybe the whole town is in on it, or at least part of it. Maybe that's why Fiona went missing. Jack nodded his head, deep in thought, letting Miguel's words sink in. What could it be that they're all trying so desperately to hide? Miguel glanced over, giving Jack a look that said, "Now you're getting it. It's about time." What do you think is worth running everyone off this mountain, scaring everyone with banshees and tales of evil creatures? What would make a town go to such extremes? Jack and Miguel stared at each other, and Jack nodded his head. Gold. The twins ran along the beach, their laughter ringing out over the gently lapping waves. Their small feet left fleeting imprints in the sand, soon washed away by the incoming tide. Sasha followed at a slower pace, her hands in her pockets, as she watched them toss smooth stones into the water. Each splash seemed to ignite another round of giggles. "Don't go too far," Sasha called out, her voice carrying on the salty breeze along with the cries of seagulls. The twins waved back, their faces lit with excitement. Behind them, the sea stretched endlessly, its surface glistening with diamond sparkles as the sun shone down brightly upon it. It was the first clear blue sky they'd seen since they arrived. Catherine and Juanita were beachcombing, wandering along the sandy shoreline, close to the rocks. They didn't want to make it too obvious that they were heading for the same area where they'd found the gold coins. They were carrying digging implements with them today, disguised as children's toys. Back at the house, Jack and Miguel were deep in conversation. Miguel's theory about Father O'Malley's true intentions weighed heavily on Jack's mind. Jack tapped his fingers against the table, his thoughts racing. "We'll go up there tomorrow, the four of us, you and I and Julian and Usko. Once we find our location and make sure no one else is around, we can transform into our wolf bodies. It will be easier to hide that way. Malachi and his pack of brothers are planning on being there as well. At this point, I'm not sure who I can trust, but I'd place my bet on Malachi over Father O'Malley," Jack told Miguel. Grizzly, who had stayed behind, nodded in agreement. "What about Carl?" "Well, he's not able to change into a wolf. I think he'd be a liability. It's far too dangerous to have him there with us," Jack replied. "I'm not so sure about that," Grizzly explained. "At least you'd have someone there with a gun." "Well, you got a point there," Jack said. "And he did come all this way because he wanted to help." Grizzly nodded his head in agreement. "I'll hold things down here at the fort. My bum leg is acting up something fierce. I wish I could go with you all, but I would definitely be a liability." Jack smiled. "We understand, Grizz. And besides, someone's got to make sure the women stay here at the house. Sasha's going to be worried to death, and I wouldn't be surprised if she didn't come along to help. You've got to convince her that she needs to stay here to protect the rest of the family if anything goes south." Grizzly stood and put his hand on Jack's shoulder. "I'll guard her with my life, Jack. You know I will." Well, thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you'll join us next week as we read more of the Wolfman Chronicles. And until then, have a great week, everyone.